The whispers of Zephyr Blackwood's laughter drifted through the dusty streets of Yerington, Nevada, like an unwelcome storm too bold, too unbridled for a town that preferred its women quiet as church mice. But to Owen Rafferty, that laugh was the very sound that had saved him from the hollow existence he'd been living since arriving in the silver mining territory in 1878. Miss Blackwood. Mrs. Everett's pinched face wrinkled further as she clutched her shawl tighter around bony shoulders. Must you announce your presence to the entire territory? A lady of proper breeding would never make such a spectacle. Zephyr tilted her chin, eyes bright with defiance beneath the brim of her modest hat. At 22, she'd heard these complaints her entire life, yet they never seemed to diminish her spirit. "I do apologize, Mrs. Everett. It seems my joy escaped before I could trap it behind my teeth." Owen leaned against the post office wall, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips as he watched the exchange. At 25, he'd seen enough of life's darkness to recognize true light when he saw it, and Zephyr Blackwood was nothing if not luminous. The year was 1879. And Yerington was caught between its mining town roots and aspirations of becoming a respectable settlement. Men still outnumbered women 3-1, which made someone like Zephyr unmarried, educated, and employed as the schoolteacher both valuable and suspect. "Some folks might appreciate a bit more decorum, is all I'm saying," Mrs. Everett continued, looking to the other women gathered outside the general store for support. "Your voice carries clear across to the saloon. What will people think?" "That I'm alive, I should hope," Zephyr replied, adjusting the basket of supplies on her arm. Her dark hair caught the afternoon sun, the escaped tendrils framing a face that Owen had found himself sketching in the margins of his ledgers more times than he cared to admit. The women clucked their disapproval, but Zephyr merely nodded politely and continued down the boardwalk. Owen straightened, timing his movements so their paths would intersect naturally. "Miss Blackwood," he tipped his hat as she approached. "Mr. Rafferty," she replied, the formality at odds with the sparkle in her hazel eyes. "Eavesdropping, were you? Hard not to when you're the most interesting thing in this town," he said, falling into step beside her. His spurs jingled softly with each step, a rhythmic counterpoint to the swish of her skirts. "That's not saying much in Yerington," she quipped, but the smile that accompanied her words transformed her face, and Owen felt that familiar tightening in his chest. Owen had arrived in Yerington after years of driving cattle across the Western Territories. He'd saved enough to buy into the town's livery stable, trading the endless horizons of the trail for the settled life of a businessman. But until Zephyr had arrived 6 months ago to take over the schoolhouse, he'd begun to wonder if stability was worth the monotony. "May I carry your basket?" he offered, noting the weight of it pulling against her arm. "That's not necessary," she began, but he had already relieved her of the burden. "Books?" he asked, surprised by the heft. "Yes, for the children. Mr. Peterson at the general store finally received the shipment from San Francisco. The children have been making do with just 3 primers and a Bible since January. You're changing things around here," Owen observed as they walked toward the small house the town had provided for its teacher. "Not quickly enough," she sighed. "Half the mining families won't send their children to school. They'd rather have them working." "Can't eat letters and numbers," Owen said, not unkindly. "No, but education is what separates us from—" She stopped, glancing at him. "I sound like one of those Eastern reformers, don't I?" "You sound like someone who cares," he replied. "That's rare enough to be worth listening to." They reached the whitewashed fence that surrounded her modest home. Owen handed back the basket, their fingers brushing momentarily. "Will you be at the Founders' Day dance Saturday next?" he asked, the question casual though his heart hammered against his ribs. "I suppose I must. As the schoolteacher, I'm expected to represent civilization and refinement," she said with a theatrical sigh that made him chuckle. "Then perhaps you'll save a dance for this uncivilized cowboy." "Perhaps," she replied, but the warmth in her voice suggested certainty rather than possibility. As Owen walked back toward the livery, he couldn't help but smile. The other cowboys might mock his interest in the too loud schoolteacher, but they hadn't heard what he heard when Zephyr laughed, the sound of pure, unrestrained joy, as rare and precious as gold in these harsh lands. The following days moved with agonizing slowness for Owen. He threw himself into his work, breaking a particularly stubborn Mustang for the stage coach line, and repairing the stable's leaky roof before the summer thunderstorms rolled in. All the while, his thoughts circled back to Zephyr, to her fearless laugh, her quick wit, and the way she stood her ground against the town's disapproval. On Thursday, he was shoeing a customer's horse when he heard the now familiar sound of Zephyr's voice, raised in what seemed to be an argument. He finished securing the last nail and straightened, wiping his hands on a rag as he moved toward the stable doors. Across the street, Zephyr stood on the schoolhouse steps, facing Harold Decker, one of the wealthier mine owners in the area. Beside Decker was his son, a boy of about 12 who stared sullenly at his boots. "Miss Blackwood, Thomas is needed at the mine," Decker was saying, his voice carrying in the quiet street. "Reading poetry won't put food on our table. Mr. Decker, your son has a bright mind. He's already reading at a level far beyond his years, and his mathematics won't dig silver out of rock," Decker interrupted. "He's old enough to work the sorting tables." "He's a child," Zephyr said, her voice rising with passion. "And he deserves the chance at something better than honest work." Decker's face reddened. "Not all of us can afford Eastern ideals, Miss Blackwood. Some of us live in the real world." Owen saw Zephyr draw herself up taller, noticed the faces appearing in windows up and down the street, drawn by the confrontation. "The real world is changing, Mr. Decker. Without education, your son will be left behind when the mines play out, and they will play out." A small crowd had gathered now, watching the exchange with interest. Mrs. Everett and her circle stood nearby, their expressions a mixture of scandal and satisfaction at seeing the outspoken teacher put in her place. "That's enough," Decker snapped. "Thomas won't be returning to school. Come along, boy." As they walked away, Owen saw the boy glance back at Zephyr, his expression a mixture of regret and resignation. Zephyr remained on the steps, her shoulders rigid with contained emotion. Without thinking, Owen crossed the street. The small crowd dispersed, apparently disappointed that the entertainment was over. "Miss Blackwood," he said softly as he reached her. "Are you all right?" She turned to him, eyes bright with unshed tears that she refused to let fall. "I'm perfectly fine, Mr. Rafferty. Just confronting the limitations of progress in our enlightened age. Would you like to take a walk?" he offered. "The livery can spare me for half an hour." She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Let me get my shawl." They walked in silence away from the main street, following a path that led toward a small creek on the outskirts of town. The afternoon sun cast long shadows, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. "I apologize for my outburst," Zephyr said finally, breaking the silence. "It's just so frustrating. That boy has such potential." "You care about your students," Owen observed. "There's no shame in that. But I'm not helping them if I alienate their parents. Mrs. Everett is right. I'm too loud, too opinionated. I don't fit here." Owen stopped walking, turning to face her. "Is that what you think? That you don't belong in Yerington." She looked away, focusing on the distant mountains. "Sometimes I wonder if I belong anywhere. I was too modern for my family in Philadelphia, too traditional for the suffragists I admired, and now I'm too outspoken for the West. It seems I'm always too much of something. Or perhaps," Owen said carefully, "the world is too small for who you are." Her eyes snapped back to his, surprise giving way to something warmer. "That's a very kind thing to say, Mr. Rafferty." "Owen," he corrected. "I think we've progressed beyond formalities, don't you?" A smile tugged at her lips. "Owen, then, and I'm Zephyr." "Zephyr," he repeated, liking the feel of her name. "It suits you like a fresh wind bringing change." She laughed then, the sound unrestrained and beautiful in the open air. "My mother named me for the west wind, hoping I'd be gentle and sweet. I think she was disappointed when I turned out to be more of a gale." "Some of us appreciate a good storm," Owen said, his voice dropping lower. "Clears the air, makes everything feel new again." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Zephyr was the first to look away, her cheeks flushed. "We should head back. People will talk." "People always talk," Owen replied with a shrug. "Especially about things worth talking about." The walk back to town was filled with easier conversation. Owen told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about joining a cattle drive at 17 after his parents died in a fever epidemic, about the years spent wandering before finding his place in Yerington. Zephyr spoke of her childhood in Philadelphia, her father's printing business, her mother's dismay when she announced she wanted to teach rather than marry the banker's son who had courted her. "I don't regret it," she said as they approached the schoolhouse. "Even on days like today. At least I'm living on my own terms." "That's more than most people can say," Owen replied. "It's what I admire about you." She paused at the schoolhouse steps, looking up at him with a questioning expression. "Is it really? Most men seem to prefer women who are less assertive." "Most men are fools," he said simply. A smile blossomed across her face, and Owen felt as though he'd been granted a gift. "I'll see you at the dance then. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." As Saturday approached, the town buzzed with preparations for the Founders' Day celebration. Bunting was hung from the town hall, tables were set up in the square for a community dinner, and the saloon was temporarily transformed into a more respectable establishment for the evening's dance. Owen spent longer than usual getting ready, bathing with scented soap purchased specially from the general store, trimming his beard to neatness, and donning his best shirt and vest. His fellow stable owner, Frank Miller, teased him mercilessly. "You're primping more than my wife before church," Frank laughed as Owen adjusted his collar for the third time. "The schoolmarm's really got you twisted up, hasn't she?" Owen ignored the ribbing, but he couldn't deny the truth of it. Something about Zephyr had worked its way under his skin, into his thoughts, his dreams. He'd known women before, widows looking for comfort, saloon girls offering temporary companionship, but he'd never felt this peculiar mixture of respect, admiration, and desire. The town square was already filling with people when Owen arrived. Lanterns hung from wires strung between buildings, casting a warm glow over the festivities. Children darted between adults. A fiddler tuned his instrument on a small platform, and the air smelled of roasted meat and baked goods. He spotted Zephyr immediately, standing near the schoolchildren who were preparing to recite a poem for the occasion. She wore a dress of deep blue that made her eyes appear almost golden in the lamplight. Her hair arranged more elaborately than usual, with small white flowers woven through the dark strands. Owen kept his distance during the formal ceremonies, watching as the mayor gave a speech about progress and prosperity, as the children performed their recitation, as Zephyr was called forward to say a few words about education and the future of Yerington. Her voice carried clearly across the square, confident and passionate. Owen noticed several people nodding along, though Mrs. Everett's group maintained their looks of disapproval. The dancing began soon after, with the fiddler joined by a man with a banjo and another with a harmonica. Couples formed on the makeshift dance floor, and Owen made his way toward Zephyr, who stood chatting with the Reverend's wife. "Miss Blackwood," he said, tipping his hat. "May I have this dance?" She excused herself from the conversation and placed her hand in his outstretched palm. "You certainly may, Mr. Rafferty." As he led her to the dance floor, he leaned close to her ear. "You look beautiful tonight." "Thank you," she replied, a becoming flush spreading across her cheeks. "You clean up rather well yourself, Cowboy." The music shifted to a waltz, and Owen placed his hand respectfully at her waist, keeping a proper distance between them. They moved together surprisingly well, finding a natural rhythm despite the uneven ground. "You're quite the dancer, Owen," Zephyr said, surprise evident in her voice. "Where did a cowboy learn to waltz?" my mother insisted. "Said no son of hers would grow up without knowing how to treat a lady properly on a dance floor," he replied with a fond smile at the memory. "Though I haven't had much opportunity to practice since." "Well, you've retained the skill admirably." As they twirled among the other couples, Owen was acutely aware of the eyes following them, the speculation, the curiosity, perhaps even some disapproval. The respectable livery owner and the too loud schoolteacher, moving together as if they belonged that way. The music ended too soon, and propriety demanded that he release her. "Thank you for the dance," he said formally, conscious of their audience. "The pleasure was mine," she replied with equal formality, though her eyes held the same warmth he'd seen by the creek. They danced twice more during the evening, between her duties supervising the children and his conversations with customers and friends. Each time, Owen felt the connection between them strengthen, as if they were weaving something durable and meaningful with each shared glance, each careful touch. As the celebration wound down, families with young children began to depart. The remaining dancers grew more boisterous as the punch bowl was supplemented with stronger refreshments from the saloon. Owen noticed Zephyr standing alone near the edge of the square, watching the revelry with a slight smile. "May I walk you home?" he asked, approaching her quietly. She glanced around, noting that most of her fellow teachers and the more respectable townspeople had already departed. "That would be very kind, thank you." They walked slowly, reluctant to end the evening. The sounds of the celebration faded behind them as they turned onto the quieter residential street. "Did you enjoy yourself tonight?" Owen asked. "I did, more than I expected to," she admitted. "Though I believe Mrs. Everett nearly fainted when we danced the second time." Owen chuckled. "She'll recover, probably already planning how to include it in tomorrow's gossip after church." "It doesn't bother you being talked about," he shrugged. "I've been talked about for worse reasons." "Have you?" "Not until I came to Yerington," she said thoughtfully. "In Philadelphia, I was just one of many educated young women. Here, I'm something of an oddity." "A welcome one," Owen assured her. They reached her gate, and Zephyr turned to face him, her expression serious in the silvery moonlight. "Owen, I should tell you. I came west because I wanted independence. I'm not asking for anything," he interrupted gently, "except perhaps the chance to know you better." She studied his face for a long moment. "Why, when there are plenty of more suitable women who wouldn't challenge you at every turn?" "Maybe I like being challenged," he replied with a half-smile. "Or maybe I recognize something in you that I've been looking for without knowing it." "And what's that?" "Courage," he said simply. "The courage to be exactly who you are, regardless of what anyone thinks." Her breath caught audibly and she looked away, seemingly overcome. When she looked back, her eyes shone with emotion. "Good night, Owen. Thank you for the dances." "Good night, Zephyr." He waited until she was safely inside before turning away, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The following weeks brought a gradual shift in their relationship. They began meeting regularly for walks after school, for coffee at the hotel restaurant on Saturday afternoons, occasionally for supper at the home of Frank Miller and his wife, who had taken a liking to Zephyr and her progressive ideas. Owen found himself enchanted by her mind as much as her beauty. She spoke passionately about education, about the future of the West, about books she had read and ideas she had encountered. He shared stories of his travels, of the characters he'd met on cattle drives, of the landscapes that had stolen his breath and haunted his dreams. "I'd like to see those places someday," Zephyr said one evening as they sat on her porch swing, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and purple. "The Grand Canyon, the painted desert, the great forests of the north." "You could," Owen said, "though perhaps not alone. The territories can be dangerous." "Are you offering to be my guide, Mr. Rafferty?" she asked with a teasing smile. "I might be," he replied, more seriously than she perhaps expected, "if you'd have me." The teasing light faded from her eyes, replaced by something more contemplative. "Owen, what exactly are we doing?" He took her hand, a liberty he'd only recently allowed himself. "Getting to know each other, I thought." "And beyond that," she pressed. "Because people are talking, and while I don't particularly care about gossip, I do care about my position here. The school board is already watching me closely because of my teaching methods." Owen considered his next words carefully. "I care for you, Zephyr, more than I've cared for anyone in a very long time. Where that might lead, well, I suppose that depends on both of us." She squeezed his hand, her expression softening. "I care for you too, but I need you to understand something. I didn't come west to find a husband. I came to build a life of my own making." "I would never ask you to be less than who you are," Owen promised. "Not for me, not for anyone." Her smile returned then, brilliant as the setting sun. "Then I suppose we'll continue getting to know each other and see where the trail leads." As summer gave way to autumn, their courtship progressed with a caution that belied the depth of feeling growing between them. They were careful to maintain propriety in public, mindful of Zephyr's position and the town's watchful eyes. But there were moments of lingering touch when he helped her into a wagon, the brush of his thumb across her wrist as he handed her a book, the way she sometimes looked at him when she thought no one was watching that spoke of something far beyond friendship. In late September, as the aspens turned golden on the mountainsides, catastrophe struck Yerington. A fire broke out in the dry goods store, spreading quickly to neighboring buildings in the strong autumn winds. The entire town turned out to fight the blaze, forming bucket brigades from the creek and wells. Owen was working alongside other men to tear down a small shed, creating a firebreak, when he heard a woman scream. Through the smoke, he saw Mrs. Peterson gesturing wildly at the millinery shop, which was now fully engulfed. "My daughter," she cried. "Eliza is still inside." Without hesitation, Owen dropped his tools and ran toward the burning building. The heat was intense, the smoke choking as he entered through the front door, crouching low to find clearer air. "Eliza," he called, coughing as smoke filled his lungs. "Eliza, where are you?" A faint cry came from the back room. Owen pushed forward, navigating around burning displays and fallen beams. He found the girl, no more than 16, trapped beneath a heavy cabinet that had toppled in the chaos. "Hold on," he grunted, summoning his strength to lift the cabinet enough for her to scramble free. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though her face was streaked with soot and tears. Owen wrapped his jacket around her and guided her toward the door, aware that the flames were spreading rapidly overhead. They were nearly at the entrance when a burning beam crashed down, blocking their path. Owen looked frantically for another way out, spotting a window partially obscured by smoke. He broke the glass with his elbow, cleared the frame as best he could, and helped Eliza through before following her. They emerged into the alley behind the shop, coughing and gasping for fresh air. Owen heard shouts as people spotted them, felt hands helping them away from the burning building. Through watering eyes, he saw Zephyr pushing through the crowd, her face pale with fear. "Owen," she cried, reaching him just as his legs gave way. "Someone get the doctor." He tried to reassure her that he was fine, just winded, but a coughing fit overtook him. The world began to blur at the edges, sounds becoming distant and muffled. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was Zephyr's face above his, her lips forming words he couldn't hear. Owen awoke to the sound of gentle humming and the sensation of a cool cloth on his forehead. He blinked, his vision gradually focusing on a familiar ceiling. He was in his own room above the livery. Turning his head, he found Zephyr seated beside his bed, a book open in her lap, though her attention was on the cloth she was rinsing in a basin. "You're supposed to be teaching," he croaked, his voice rough from smoke and disuse. Her head snapped up, relief flooding her features. "Owen, thank God." She leaned forward, pressing the fresh cloth to his brow. "How do you feel?" "Like I tried to smoke a whole tobacco field," he replied with a weak attempt at humor. "How long have I been out?" 2 days, she said, her voice catching. "The doctor wasn't sure. Your lungs." She broke off, composing herself. "But he said this morning that the worst had passed." Owen reached for her hand, finding it trembling slightly. "What about the fire? And Eliza?" "The fire was contained before it could spread beyond that block. 4 buildings were lost, but no lives, thanks in part to you. Eliza has some burns and a broken ankle from when the cabinet fell, but she'll recover fully. And you're here instead of at school because—" A flush crept up her neck. "School was canceled for 2 days because of the fire, and I volunteered to help care for you. Frank and his wife have been taking shifts as well." "Quite the scandal, I imagine," Owen said with a weak smile. "The schoolteacher playing nurse to the bachelor liveryman." Zephyr's expression grew serious. "I don't care. When I saw you collapse when the doctor said you might not." Her voice broke, and she squeezed his hand tightly. "Some things matter more than gossip, Owen." He raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I'm not going anywhere, Zephyr, not if I can help it." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she smiled, that radiant smile that had captivated him from the beginning. "Good, because I've realized something while sitting here watching you breathe." "What's that?" he asked, his heart quickening despite his weakness. "That independence doesn't have to mean being alone. That perhaps 2 people can build something together without either having to diminish themselves." Owen felt a surge of emotion so powerful it momentarily robbed him of speech. When he found his voice again, it was husky with feeling. "I've been thinking the same thing, for quite some time now." She leaned closer, her free hand coming to rest gently against his cheek. "Have you now? And what were you planning to do about it?" "Get better first," he said with a chuckle that turned into a cough. When he recovered, he continued more seriously. "And then ask you properly if you might consider building a life with me. Not just any life, but one worthy of both of us." Tears spilled over onto Zephyr's cheeks, but her smile never faltered. "I think I might be amenable to such a proposal. When you're well enough to make it properly." Owen's recovery was slower than he would have liked, but Zephyr's frequent visits made the convalescence bearable. She would come after school, sometimes bringing students' work to grade while she sat with him, other times reading aloud from books they both enjoyed. On weekends, she spent longer hours, helping him take short walks as his strength returned, sharing meals and talking about everything and nothing. The town's attitude toward Zephyr seemed to shift in the wake of the fire. Her unwavering care for Owen, her organization of relief efforts for the families affected by the blaze, and her calm leadership during the crisis had earned her a new level of respect. Even Mrs. Everett had grudgingly acknowledged that perhaps Miss Blackwood's excessive enthusiasm had its uses in an emergency. By mid-October, Owen was well enough to return to light duties at the livery. On a crisp Saturday morning, he saddled 2 horses and led them to Zephyr's house, where she waited in a riding skirt and jacket, her hair braided simply down her back. "Are you sure you're strong enough for this?" she asked as he helped her mount. "The doctor said fresh air would do me good," Owen replied, swinging into his own saddle with only a slight wince. "And I have something to show you." They rode out of town, following a trail that wound up into the foothills above Yerington. The autumn day was perfect clear blue sky, golden aspens trembling in the light breeze, the scent of pine and dry leaves in the air. After about an hour's ride, they came to a clearing overlooking the valley. Owen dismounted and helped Zephyr down, then led her to the edge of the viewpoint. Below them, Yerington spread out like a toy town, smoke rising from chimneys, the silver ribbon of the creek winding through the settlement. "It's beautiful," Zephyr said, taking in the panorama. "I found this place my first month here," Owen told her. "I come up when I need to think, to remember that there's more to life than the day-to-day concerns down there." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small blanket, which he spread on a flat rock. From the same bag came a bundle wrapped in cloth bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a small flask of cider. "A picnic," Zephyr's eyes lit up with pleasure. "I thought it might be nice," Owen said, suddenly feeling uncharacteristically nervous, "before the weather turns too cold for such things." They ate companionably, discussing the progress of Owen's business, Zephyr's ongoing battles with the school board, and the latest town gossip. When they had finished, Owen gathered his courage and took Zephyr's hands in his. "I've been thinking a lot during my recovery," he began. "About what matters, about what kind of life I want." Zephyr's expression grew serious as she sensed the shift in his tone. "And what have you concluded? That life is unpredictable and precious. That love, when you find it, shouldn't be taken for granted or postponed." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Zephyr. Your mind, your spirit, your laugh that sounds like pure joy to me. I love your courage and your convictions. I love who I am when I'm with you." Her eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise even as her fingers tightened around his. "I'm not asking you to be less," Owen continued. "I'm asking if we might be more together than we could ever be apart." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring with a modest diamond flanked by 2 small sapphires. "This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it as my wife." Zephyr stared at the ring, then at Owen's face, tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "Owen, before you answer," he interrupted gently, "I want you to know that I understand your concerns about independence. I don't want a traditional wife who exists in my shadow. I want a partner. The school is important to you, and I would never ask you to give it up. We can find a way forward that honors both our dreams." A tear spilled over, tracing a silvery path down her cheek. "You've given this a lot of thought." "I've had little else to think about while recovering," he admitted with a small smile. "So, Zephyr Blackwood, will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Her laugh burst forth then, that unfettered sound that had first captured his heart, bright and joyous in the clear mountain air. "Yes," she said, the word carrying on the breeze. "Yes, Owen Rafferty, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. When they finally parted, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "Your laugh really is the most beautiful sound in the world," he murmured. "Even if it scandalizes half the town," she asked with a teasing smile. "Especially then," he assured her. "Let them talk. We know the truth of who we are." They were married on Christmas Eve, 1879, in Yerington's small church, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons for the holiday. Despite the cold, the building was filled to capacity, not just with friends like Frank Miller and his wife, but with parents of Zephyr's students, miners and shopkeepers, and even Mrs. Everett and her circle, who had gradually come to appreciate the schoolteacher's contributions to the community. Zephyr wore a dress of deep ivory satin, with a high collar and fitted sleeves in the current fashion, but with fewer frills and furbelows than was typical. Her dark hair was arranged in an elegant knot, adorned with small white flowers similar to those she'd worn at the Founder's Day dance. Owen, standing at the altar in his best suit, thought she had never looked more beautiful. When the Reverend prompted Zephyr to recite her vows, her clear, strong voice filled the church without hesitation or apology. No one present seemed to mind its volume or confidence. Indeed, several people nodded appreciatively at the sincerity in her tone. The reception was held at the town hall, transformed with greenery and candles into a festive space. As the newly married couple took to the floor for their first dance, Owen pulled Zephyr close enough to whisper in her ear. "Happy, Mrs. Rafferty?" "Exceedingly so, Mr. Rafferty," she replied, her eyes dancing with joy. "Though I hope you know that in the classroom I'll remain Miss Blackwood." The children would be terribly confused otherwise. Owen laughed, twirling her in a graceful turn. "Whatever makes you happy makes me happy." "A dangerous promise," she teased. "What if what makes me happy is moving to San Francisco to open a school for girls?" He pretended to consider this. "Then I suppose I'd have to find a livery for sale in San Francisco, or perhaps try my hand at something new." Her expression softened. "You would do that. Leave Yerington if I wanted to go, Zephyr," he said seriously. "Home isn't a place. It's where we're together." She pressed closer to him, propriety momentarily forgotten. "I love you, Owen Rafferty." "And I love you, Zephyr Rafferty." Loud voice, magnificent laugh and all. Spring arrived early in 1880, bringing with it new growth, renewed mining activity, and news that the railroad might extend a spur line to Yerington within the next 2 years. The town buzzed with excitement about the prosperity such a connection would bring. Owen and Zephyr had settled into married life in a small house halfway between the school and the livery, close enough to both that they could each walk to work. They had expanded the living quarters, adding a study for Zephyr filled with books and maps, and a workshop for Owen where he designed improvements for saddles and tack. Their home quickly became known as a place of lively discussion and warm hospitality. Zephyr hosted regular reading circles for women and older students, while Owen started a chess club that met weekly in their front room. Together, they advocated for community improvements, a proper library, a small hospital, better wages for the miners. Not everyone appreciated their progressive ideas. There were still those who muttered that Zephyr should focus on being a proper wife rather than continuing to teach and participate in town affairs. But increasingly, her intelligence and commitment to the community earned respect, even from former critics. One warm afternoon in May, Zephyr returned home from school earlier than usual. Owen, who had been repairing a harness on the front porch, looked up in surprise. "Classes end early today. he asked, setting aside his work. "No," she replied, a strange mixture of nervousness and excitement in her expression. "I asked Mrs. Wilson to watch my class for the last hour. I needed to see Dr. Thompson." Owen stood immediately, concern flooding his features. "Are you ill?" "You seemed fine this morning, but—" "I'm not ill," Zephyr interrupted, a smile breaking across her face. "Quite the opposite, in fact." She took his hands, placing them gently against her still flat abdomen. "We're going to have a baby, Owen, in December." For a moment, Owen stood frozen, his mind struggling to absorb her words. Then joy surged through him, so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. "A baby, you're certain?" The doctor confirmed it. "I've suspected for a few weeks now, but I wanted to be sure before I told you." Owen whooped with delight, lifting Zephyr off her feet and spinning her in a circle. Her laugh rang out, clear and bright in the afternoon sunshine. When he set her down, he kissed her soundly, heedless of who might see. "I'm going to be a father," he said in wonder as they broke apart. "And you, my love, will be the most extraordinary mother." Zephyr's expression turned thoughtful. "I want to continue teaching, at least until I'm showing too much, and afterward when the baby is old enough, of course," Owen assured her without hesitation. "We'll figure it out together. Perhaps we can arrange for help with the baby while you're at school, or I could adjust my hours at the livery." Relief and gratitude softened her features. "You truly don't mind. Some husbands would expect their wives to give up their profession entirely." "I didn't marry some wife," Owen reminded her. "I married you, Zephyr, with all your passion and purpose. Our child will be better for having a mother who follows her calling as well as her heart." The months of Zephyr's pregnancy passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. They converted a small room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, painted sunny yellow at Zephyr's insistence. Owen crafted a cradle from cherry wood, working on it in the evenings while Zephyr read aloud from books on childcare and education. True to her word, Zephyr continued teaching until November, when the school board insisted she take leave for the final month before the birth. She channeled her restless energy into organizing a winter donation drive for mining families struggling to make ends meet. On a snowy night just before Christmas, after nearly 20 hours of labor, Zephyr gave birth to a son. Owen, who had refused to leave her side despite the midwife's initial protests, held his wife's hand through every contraction, wiping her brow and murmuring encouragement when her strength faltered. "He's perfect," Owen whispered, cradling the swaddled infant while sitting beside Zephyr on their bed. The boy had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they had appeared to be the same hazel as his mother's. "What shall we name him?" Zephyr asked, exhausted but radiant. "I thought perhaps Thomas," Owen suggested. "After that bright boy who had to leave your school." Zephyr's eyes filled with tears. "Thomas Rafferty, it's a good name, a strong name." She stroked the baby's cheek with a gentle finger. "Hello, Thomas, we've been waiting for you." As if in response, the baby made a small sound and turned his face toward his mother's touch. "He knows your voice already," Owen observed with a smile. "He heard it every day, teaching and laughing. And he'll keep hearing it," Zephyr promised. "I'll read to him every day, tell him stories, teach him everything I know. And I'll teach him to ride, to work with his hands, to respect the land and all who dwell on it," Owen added. "Between us, he'll have quite an education." Zephyr leaned against Owen's shoulder, watching their son's peaceful face. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she confessed softly. "When I came west, I thought independence meant standing alone. I never considered that it might mean choosing the right person to stand beside." "We're stronger together," Owen agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Always have been, from the moment I heard your laugh and knew my life would never be the same." By the summer of 1885, Yerington had transformed from a struggling mining settlement into a prosperous town with a railway connection, a proper school building with 3 teachers, and a growing reputation as a progressive community in the Nevada Territory. Owen's livery had expanded to include a carriage service and a small horse breeding operation specializing in sturdy, intelligent mounts suited to the challenging terrain. Zephyr had been appointed head teacher at the school and had implemented a curriculum that was considered innovative even by Eastern standards, incorporating practical skills alongside traditional subjects. Their family had grown as well. Thomas, now 4.5, was joined by 2-year-old Elizabeth, named for Owen's mother. A 3rd child was expected in the autumn. On the 10th anniversary of Zephyr's arrival in Yerington, the town council organized a celebration in her honor, acknowledging her contributions to education and community development. The ceremony was held in the town square, with speeches from the mayor, former students, and parents. When it was Zephyr's turn to speak, she stood tall despite her advancing pregnancy, her voice carrying confidently across the gathered crowd. Owen watched from nearby, Thomas's hand in his while Elizabeth perched on his shoulders, her small fingers tangled in his hair. "When I first came to Yerington," Zephyr began, "many of you thought my voice was too loud, my ideas too bold, my laugh too unrestrained for a proper teacher." A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the audience. "And perhaps you were right, by the standards of the day. But Yerington has grown since then, and so have I." She looked toward Owen, her expression softening. "I found my home here not just a place to live, but a place to belong. I found a partner who never asked me to be less, only encouraged me to be more. Together, we've raised children who know that their voices matter, that their dreams have value." Mrs. Everett, now white-haired but still formidable, called out from her seat. "And we've all learned that sometimes a loud voice is exactly what's needed to wake people up." More laughter followed, Zephyr's among the brightest. Owen felt his heart swell with pride and love as he watched her, still as vibrant and fearless as the day they met. Later that evening, as they sat on their expanded front porch watching the sunset, children already asleep inside, Zephyr rested her head against Owen's shoulder. "Did you ever imagine, when you first heard me laughing too loudly outside the general store, that we'd end up here?" she asked. Owen slipped his arm around her, his hand coming to rest on the swell of their unborn child. "Not specifically," he admitted, "but I knew even then that you were someone extraordinary, someone who would leave her mark wherever she went. And you? The cowboy who saw joy where others saw impropriety. I just saw you," he said simply. "The real you behind all the town's expectations and judgments." Zephyr tilted her face up to his. "I'm glad you did. I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad we built this life together." Owen kissed her softly, still marveling after all these years at the feeling of rightness when they were together. "So am I, my love. So am I." As darkness settled over Yerington, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about their plans, their dreams, their children's futures. And occasionally, Zephyr's laugh would ring out, clear and uninhibited in the night air, the sound of joy that had first captured Owen's heart, the sound that now filled their home and their lives with its music. In the years that followed, that laugh became legendary in Yerington. Children grew up hearing stories about the schoolteacher whose voice was too loud for the times, but whose vision helped shape a community. They heard about the cowboy who recognized the sound of joy when others heard only impropriety. And they learned that love, true love, never asks you to be less than who you are. It simply gives you the courage to become more.